Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across Boston's financial district. The December wind howled between skyscrapers, transforming the elegant streets into Arctic tunnels. Robert Westbrook stared through the frosted windshield of his Bentley, knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. At 54, the CEO of Westbrook Capital commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. Yet tonight, exhaustion carved deep lines across his face. The quarterly board meeting had stretched into evening, filled with projections and profits that once excited him, but now felt hollow. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed 9:47 p.m. His 6-year-old son Lucas would already be waiting at Frost & Oak with Mrs. Jenkins, the latest in a revolving door of nannies. Guilt pressed against his chest like a physical weight. Another dinner missed, another bedtime story delegated to hired help. As the Bentley crawled through the snowstorm toward the restaurant, Robert caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. Steel gray hair cropped military short, piercing blue eyes now webbed with fine wrinkles, jaw perpetually clenched. Claire used to tease him about that jaw, pressing her fingers against the tension until he smiled. 6 years without her, and the muscles had forgotten how to relax. Frost & Oak appeared through the curtain of snow, its windows gleaming with warm amber light. The valet rushed forward as Robert pulled to the curb, hunched against the bitter cold. Through the glass doors, Robert could see his sons sitting primly at their usual corner table, small hands folded on the white tablecloth, eyes fixed on the untouched breadbasket. Mrs. Jenkins beside him, absorbed in her phone. Robert reached for the door handle, then froze. Something had caught his eye. A small figure huddled in the narrow alley beside the restaurant, half hidden behind a snow-covered dumpster. A child, barely visible in the dim light, wearing what looked like a boy's jacket several sizes too large. The collar was pulled high, but Robert could see it was a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, with tangled brown hair dusted with snowflakes. She was watching the restaurant with an intensity that struck him as both desperate and calculating. Even from this distance, Robert could see she was shivering violently. "Sir, would you like me to park the car?" The valet's voice broke through his thoughts. Robert nodded absently, still watching the child. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, Maxwell, the restaurant's longtime doorman, greeted him with a respectful nod. "Evening, Mr. Westbrook. Young Master Lucas is already seated." Robert gestured toward the alley. "Maxwell, that child over there, do you know who she is?" Maxwell glanced over, his professional smile faltering. "Ah, yes, sir. She comes around most evenings. Looking for leftovers, you understand. Since the Peterson family disappeared about 2 years back, she's been staying in the back alley behind Pearson's bookshop. The police have tried to pick her up a few times, but she's clever. Always vanishes before they arrive." Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the winter air. "She lives on the street? In this weather? Where are social services?" Maxwell shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "System's overwhelmed, sir. Sometimes I slip her some bread or soup. Against policy, of course, but—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. Robert stared at the child, who had now noticed their attention and shrunk further into the shadows. Something about her eyes, visible even at this distance, tugged at his memory. "Sir," Maxwell prompted gently, "your son is waiting." Inside, the restaurant enveloped Robert in warmth and the rich aroma of seared meat and truffles. The maitre d' ushered him toward the corner table where Lucas sat, back straight as a soldier's, dark eyes scanning the room methodically. The boy gave no indication he had seen his father arrive, though Robert knew he had. Lucas missed nothing. "Hello, son," Robert said, settling into his chair and dismissing Mrs. Jenkins with a nod. She gathered her things quickly, eager to escape the tension that followed Robert everywhere. "Sorry, I'm late." Lucas didn't respond. He never did. Not verbally, at least. 6 years of specialists, therapies, and tests had yielded diagnoses ranging from severe autism to profound verbal apraxia. The most recent neurologist, Dr. Eleanor Richards, had simply called it neurological silence, a term Robert found both useless and poetic. Whatever the label, the result was the same. Lucas Westbrook had never spoken a single word. Instead, the boy reached for his tablet, fingers flying across the screen with practiced precision. A moment later, a robotic voice emerged. "Hello, Father. The meeting ran long again." Not a question, an observation delivered in the flat, emotionless tone of the text-to-speech program. Robert felt the familiar pang of longing to hear his son's actual voice, to know what it might sound like. Would it have Claire's musical lilt, his own deeper resonance? Yes, budget projections for next quarter. Nothing interesting. Robert unfolded his napkin, signaling to the waiter. Have you ordered yet? Lucas shook his head, dark curls bouncing slightly. Claire's curls. One of the many gifts she had given their son before she left them both. The usual then? Steak, potatoes, no sauce? Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Lucas ate the same meal at every restaurant, a predictable pattern that provided comfort in a world the boy found chaotic. Lucas nodded, then turned to look out the window. Robert followed his gaze and saw the little girl had emerged from the alley, moving cautiously toward the restaurant's back entrance, where kitchen staff occasionally stepped out for smoke breaks. She was watching the doors with the patience of a much older person, clearly waiting for an opportunity. Something inside Robert twisted painfully. He thought of Lucas, with his custom-tailored wool coat and handcrafted Italian shoes, sleeping in a heated penthouse with views of the harbor. And then this child, probably the same age, waiting for scraps in a blizzard. Order me the usual as well, Robert told the hovering waiter, and please add a full children's meal to go. The works, chicken tenders, fries, chocolate milk, dessert, everything. The waiter nodded, accustomed to the eccentric requests of the wealthy. Robert returned his attention to Lucas, who was now sketching something on his tablet, an architectural drawing far beyond the capabilities of most adults, let alone a 6-year-old. Another manifestation of whatever neurological uniqueness had taken his speech had enhanced other abilities to extraordinary levels. Their meals arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence. Robert had long ago stopped trying to force conversation. Instead, he watched his son's methodical eating habits. Each food item touched exactly 3 times with his fork before being consumed, nothing allowed to mix on the plate. Every few minutes, Lucas would look up and search the room, his eyes always returning to the window where the homeless girl occasionally appeared, circling the building like a wary animal. When the meal was complete, the waiter presented Robert with a carefully packed takeout container. The children's meal you requested, sir. Robert took it and nodded to Lucas. Time to go home, son. Outside, the snow had intensified. Maxwell held the door as they exited, and Robert paused, scanning the street for the girl. She was nowhere to be seen. The child, Robert said to Maxwell. Where did she go? Probably around back, sir. Kitchen throws out scraps around this time. Robert hesitated, the warm container in his hand. Lucas, wait here with Maxwell for a moment. The doorman placed a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder as Robert walked around the corner toward the service alley. The wind bit through his cashmere coat, a reminder of the brutal cold this child endured daily. The alley was dark except for a single security light above the kitchen door, illuminating swirling snow and steam from the vents. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye, small fingers reaching into a black trash bag that a kitchen worker had just tossed into the dumpster. The girl was balanced precariously on a milk crate, stretching to reach inside. You don't need to do that, Robert called. I have food, proper food. The girl startled violently, nearly falling from her perch. She scrambled back, eyes wild with fear as they locked onto Robert. For a moment, neither moved. Then recognition flickered across her face, not of Robert personally, but of what he represented: wealth, authority, danger. Not interested, she said, her voice surprisingly clear and strong, despite her size. I don't go with strange men. Robert felt a flash of admiration for her street smarts, even as his heart broke at the implication that she'd been approached before. I'm not asking you to go anywhere, he said, holding up the takeout container. Just offering a meal that isn't from the trash. My son is around your age. I thought you might be hungry. She studied him warily, weighing hunger against risk. Her face, though smudged with dirt, was striking. Intelligent eyes set in delicate features, a determined chin. Something about her seemed eerily familiar, though Robert couldn't place it. What's the catch? She asked, still not moving closer. No catch, it's just food. She considered this, then with the careful movements of prey approaching a potential predator, she edged forward until she was just beyond arm's reach. Robert slowly extended the container. She snatched it quickly, backing away several steps before opening it to inspect the contents. The expression that crossed her face at the sight of hot, fresh food pierced Robert to his core. It was too complex for a child her age. Relief, suspicion, calculation, and a carefully suppressed desperation. "Thank you," she said formally, as if remembering manners from another life. Robert nodded, suddenly unsure what to do next. The rational decision would be to call social services immediately, but Maxwell's comments about her evading authorities gave him pause. She'd likely disappear again, back into the streets, into the snowstorm. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She studied him while taking a careful bite of chicken. "Sophie," she finally answered. "Just Sophie. I'm Robert. The boy with me is my son, Lucas." Something flickered in Sophie's eyes at the mention of Lucas. She glanced toward the front of the restaurant, though the angle made it impossible to see around the corner. "The boy who doesn't talk," she said, not a question but a statement. Robert felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. "How do you know that?" Sophie shrugged, focusing intently on her food, eating now with controlled but obvious hunger. "I see things. I watch people." She looked up suddenly, eyes unnervingly direct. "He wants to talk. He just can't find the words. They're stuck somewhere deep." Robert stared at her, astonished both by the insight and the articulate way she expressed it. Before he could respond, she continued, her voice taking on an odd, almost dreamy quality. "If I make your son talk, will you give me your leftovers for a week?" The question was so unexpected, so absurd that Robert almost laughed. But there was something in her expression, a certainty, a knowledge that stopped him. "Sophie, Lucas has seen the finest specialist in the country. His condition is—" "I can do it," she interrupted, with the simple confidence of a child stating an obvious fact. "I know I can. I've been looking for him a long time." The statement was so strange that Robert felt a prickle of unease. "Looking for him? What do you mean?" But Sophie had retreated back into wariness, perhaps sensing she'd said too much. She clutched the food container protectively. "Just let me try. What do you have to lose?" What indeed, Robert thought. He should be getting Lucas home, not engaging with a street child's fantasy. Yet something held him there, something in her eyes that seemed to pull at threads of memory he couldn't quite grasp. "All right," he said, finally. "Come meet him, then we'll get you somewhere warm for the night at least." She hesitated, then nodded once decisively. She followed Robert around the building, staying just beyond arm's reach, alert as a wild animal. When they rounded the corner to the restaurant entrance, Lucas was still waiting beside Maxwell, precisely where Robert had left him. The boy was watching the falling snow with apparent fascination, each unique crystalline pattern capturing his attention. "Lucas," Robert called softly. "This is Sophie." Lucas turned, his dark eyes finding the girl immediately. For a moment, he simply stared, his expression unchanged. Then something extraordinary happened. His eyes widened, his lips parted. An almost imperceptible tremor ran through his small body. Sophie stepped forward, moving past Robert as if drawn by an invisible force. She stopped directly in front of Lucas, studying his face with the same intensity he was studying hers. The resemblance struck Robert then. The same shaped eyes, the same curve of chin, similar complexion, despite Sophie's evident malnutrition. Coincidence, surely. "Hello," Sophie said quietly. "I found you." What happened next would alter the course of Robert Westbrook's life forever. Lucas opened his mouth, and after 6 years of unbroken silence, spoke his first words. "She was with me, Daddy." His voice was clear, perfect, as if he'd been speaking all along. "She was in Mommy's tummy with me." Maxwell gasped audibly. Robert felt the world tilt beneath his feet, snow and light and sound blurring around the edges of his vision. Lucas was talking. Lucas was talking about a twin, about Claire's pregnancy, things he couldn't possibly know. "What did you say?" Robert whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break whatever miracle was occurring. Lucas kept his eyes fixed on Sophie, recognition blazing in them. "Daddy," he said, the words strange in his unpracticed mouth. "She's my sister." Sophie stood perfectly still, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Triumph, relief, and something deeper, more primal. Recognition. "I told you I could make him talk," she said to Robert, but her eyes never left Lucas's face. "I've been looking for him my whole life." Robert staggered slightly, steadying himself against the restaurant's stone facade. 7 years of specialists, therapies, experimental treatments in heartache. 7 years of silence from his son. And now this child, this homeless girl, appears from nowhere and unlocks his voice with her mere presence. "Maxwell," Robert said, his voice strained, "please have my car brought around immediately." The doorman, visibly shaken by what he'd witnessed, hurried to comply. Robert knelt between the two children, looking from one face to the other. The similarities were undeniable now that they were side by side. "Sophie," he said carefully, "what do you know about Lucas? About being his sister?" Sophie shrugged, but the nonchalance seemed forced. "I just always knew I had a brother somewhere. I dream about him. When I saw him through the window last month, I knew it was him." "Last month? You've been watching us?" "I had to be sure," she said simply. Lucas reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against Sophie's worn sleeve. "Don't leave again," he said, the words flowing with increasing confidence. "It hurts when you're gone." Sophie nodded solemnly. "I know." The Bentley appeared at the curb, the valet jumping out to open doors. Robert made a decision. "Both of you into the car. We're going home, and then we'll figure this out." Lucas complied immediately. Sophie hesitated, years of street survival instincts warring with what appeared to be an almost magnetic pull toward the boy. Finally, she gave a short nod and slid into the luxurious back seat, still clutching her food container like a shield. The drive to Robert's Beacon Hill penthouse passed in surreal silence. In the rearview mirror, he could see the children sitting close together, not touching, but angled toward each other like plants seeking sunlight. Lucas occasionally whispered words that Robert couldn't catch, each one a miracle, each one deepening the mystery. Ms. Jenkins met them at the door, her expression shifting from professional pleasantness to shock as she took in Sophie's disheveled appearance. "Mr. Westbrook, is everything—" "That will be all for tonight, Ms. Jenkins," Robert interrupted. "We'll discuss this tomorrow." Alone with the children, Robert led them to the kitchen, watching as Sophie took in the expansive penthouse with carefully concealed awe. Her eyes cataloged exits, valuables, potential dangers. The practiced assessment of a child who had learned to survive on the streets. "Are you still hungry, Sophie?" Robert asked, opening the refrigerator. She shook her head, though her eyes lingered on the well-stocked shelves. Robert noticed her slipping a dinner roll from the counter into her pocket when she thought he wasn't looking. He pretended not to see. "Lucas, why don't you show Sophie the guest bathroom? She might want to clean up." Lucas nodded and led Sophie down the hallway, speaking softly to her the entire way. Words. So many words, flowing from his previously silent son. Robert leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, trying to process the impossible events of the evening. Claire had never mentioned twins. The doctors had never mentioned twins. Lucas's birth had been traumatic. An emergency C-section while Claire hemorrhaged. She had never awakened from the surgery. Robert had been so focused on his dying wife, then on his grief, that the details of the birth itself remained hazy in his memory. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Despite the late hour, Dr. Eleanor Richards answered on the third ring. "Robert, is everything all right?" "Eleanor, I need you to come to the penthouse immediately. It's Lucas. He's talking." A long pause. "Talking? What do you mean talking?" "Complete sentences. Perfect clarity. As if he's been speaking all along." Robert, that's neurologically impossible. The damage we've seen in his brain scans." "I know what we've seen. I know what every specialist has said for 6 years. But he's speaking, Eleanor. And there's more. A girl, a street child who claims to be his twin. They recognize each other. They say they were together in Claire's womb." Another longer pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. While waiting for the neurologist, Robert checked on the children. The guest bathroom door was ajar, steam escaping from a hot shower. Lucas sat on the closed toilet lid, still talking to Sophie behind the shower curtain. "Oh. And Daddy gets me books about architecture. And I have drawing programs on my tablet, and you can use them too now." Robert withdrew silently, his heart constricting. His silent, isolated son was chattering away like any normal 6-year-old. Whatever was happening defied medical explanation, but he couldn't deny the transformation before his eyes. By the time Dr. Richards arrived, Sophie was clean, dressed in a set of Lucas's pajamas that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her hair, freed from grime, was the same rich brown as Lucas's, with similar waves. The resemblance was even more pronounced now, undeniable. Dr. Richards, a tall woman with prematurely silver hair and the focused intensity of a career scientist, observed the children with poorly concealed astonishment. She had been Lucas's neurologist for 3 years, conducting countless tests, brain scans, and evaluations. She had been the one to finally tell Robert that Lucas would likely never speak. "Hello, Lucas," she said carefully. "How are you feeling tonight?" Lucas smiled at her, an expression so rare that Robert felt his breath catch. "I'm happy, Dr. Richards. I found my sister." Dr. Richards glanced at Robert, then back to the boy. "You're speaking beautifully, Lucas. Can you tell me when you started feeling able to talk?" Lucas considered this with surprising thoughtfulness. "The words were always in my head. I just couldn't get them out. It was like a wall. But when I saw Sophie, the wall broke." Sophie, perched on the edge of the sofa, watched the exchange with wary eyes. She had accepted the presence of this new adult, but clearly remained on guard. "And you, young lady," De Richards said gently. "What's your name?" "Sophie." "Sophie, how did you know about Lucas?" The girl shrugged, a gesture she seemed to use when uncomfortable with a question. "I just did. I always knew I had a brother who couldn't talk. I dreamed about him." "Dreams?" Dr. Richards leaned forward slightly. "What kind of dreams?" "About when we were little, tiny, before we were born, I think. We were together in the dark, but it wasn't scary because we weren't alone." Sophie's voice took on that dreamy quality again. "And we could talk to each other without words." Lucas nodded eagerly. "I remember too. And then there was bright light and loud noises, and she was gone. And after that, then I couldn't find the words anymore." Dr. Richards looked at Robert, professional composure cracking slightly. "Robert, I need to examine both children, and we need to verify if they're actually related. Their resemblance is remarkable, but I've already called for DNA testing. They'll be here first thing tomorrow." Robert ran a hand through his hair. "Eleanor, what's happening here? Is this some kind of shared delusion?" The neurologist shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but I'd like to do a basic physical examination tonight, if that's all right. Non-invasive, just to establish some baselines." Robert agreed, and Dr. Richards proceeded with a standard neurological assessment of both children. Lucas complied eagerly, answering questions, following instructions, naming objects, all tasks he had previously been unable to complete. Sophie submitted to the examination with reluctance, flinching slightly whenever Dr. Richards moved too quickly. As the doctor checked Sophie's reflexes, she paused, her attention caught by something on the girl's right shoulder blade, visible where the oversized pajama top had slipped. "Robert, look at this." Robert approached, peering at what appeared to be a small birthmark, a crescent moon shape, distinctively formed. "Lucas, could you come here, please?" De Richards called. When the boy approached, she carefully pulled down the collar of his pajama top, revealing his right shoulder blade. There, in exactly the same position, was an identical crescent-shaped birthmark. Robert felt the room spin slightly. "The Westbrook mark," he whispered. "Pardon?" Dr. Richards asked. "It's a birthmark that runs in my family. My grandfather had it. I have it. Lucas has it. Claire used to call it the Westbrook mark." The doctor's scientific skepticism visibly wavered. The likelihood of two unrelated children having identical birthmarks in identical locations. A knock at the door interrupted them. Robert checked his watch, nearly midnight. He opened the door to find Catherine, his younger sister, her face tight with concern. "Robert, what's going on? Your message said it was urgent about Lucas." She stopped abruptly as she entered the living room and saw the two children. Her hand flew to her mouth. "My God, who is she?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Robert said. "Catherine, meet Sophie. Sophie, this is my sister Catherine, Lucas's aunt." Catherine barely acknowledged the introduction, her wide eyes fixed on Sophie's face. "Robert," she whispered. "She looks exactly like Claire, like Claire's childhood photos." Sophie looked up at the mention of Claire, sudden interest sparking in her eyes. Claire, was that my mother's name? The simple question landed like a physical blow. Robert felt his chest constrict. Yes, he managed. Claire is Lucas's mother, my wife. She died the day Lucas was born. The day we were born, Sophie corrected matter-of-factly. Catherine approached slowly, kneeling before Sophie to study her face. The resemblance is uncanny, Robert. Not just to Lucas, to Claire. Those eyes. She glanced up at her brother. You've arranged for DNA testing? Robert nodded. Good. And hospital records? Birth certificates? I'm having everything pulled tomorrow. Sophie, do you have any papers? Birth certificate, medical records, anything from the family that was taking care of you? Sophie shook her head. The Petersons didn't have papers for me. Or if they did, they never showed me. The Petersons, Catherine repeated. Can you tell us more about them? Sophie's expression closed slightly. They took me when I was 5. Mr. Peterson went away, and Mrs. Peterson started drinking the funny-smelling stuff. Then one day she left and never came back. And before the Petersons, Robert pressed gently. Sophie frowned in concentration. A lady with dark hair and glasses. She smelled like the stuff they put on your hands at the doctor's. She took me to the Petersons. A nurse, perhaps, Dr. Richards suggested quietly, or medical staff. The adults exchanged glances, the outlines of an impossible scenario taking shape. Could it be true? Could this child, this street orphan who appeared from nowhere, actually be Lucas's twin? Claire's daughter? Robert's child? It's late, Robert said finally. The children need rest. We'll continue this tomorrow when we have more information, after Dr. Richards departed, promising to return with portable EEG equipment in the morning. Robert prepared the guest room for Sophie. The girl inspected the space with obvious amazement, running her fingers over the silken duvet as if it might dissolve under her touch. You'll be comfortable here? Robert asked, watching as she tested the mattress with careful bounces. She nodded, still looking around with wide eyes. Is this all for me? Just for sleeping? The innocent question cut through Robert's defenses. What had this child's life been like? That a simple bedroom seemed like unimaginable luxury. If she truly was his daughter, where had she been for the past 6 years? Who had taken her? And why? Yes, it's all yours. The bathroom is through that door. If you need anything in the night, my room is just down the hall. Lucas is next door. Sophie slid under the covers, her small body nearly disappearing in the plush bedding. Thank you, she said formally. Robert hesitated in the doorway. Sophie, tomorrow people will come to take samples, just swabs from inside your cheek, to see if you and Lucas are related, to see if you're my daughter. Is that all right? She considered this solemnly. You're Lucas's dad, she stated. Yes. And if I'm Lucas's sister, then you're my dad too. The simple logic of children. Robert felt his throat tighten. Yes. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. I think that would be okay, she finally said, her voice small but certain. Lucas needs me, and you seem nice. Robert turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open. In the hallway, he found Lucas waiting, clutching his tablet, though he hadn't used it once since Sophie's appearance. Time for bed, son, Robert said gently. Lucas nodded but made no move toward his room. She might get scared, he said, concern etching his features. She's been looking for me for a long time, Daddy. And I've been looking for her too. I just didn't know how to tell you. Robert knelt to his son's level, overwhelmed by the sound of his voice, by the complex thoughts and emotions he was finally able to express. Lucas, how do you know these things? About Sophie? About being twins? Lucas touched his chest, right over his heart. I always knew. Even when I couldn't say the words, I knew she was out there somewhere. That's why I couldn't talk. Half of me was missing. The certainty in his son's voice sent a chill through Robert. Children weren't supposed to speak with such conviction about things they couldn't possibly remember or understand. Yet here was Lucas, previously locked in neurological silence, articulating concepts that defied explanation. Go to sleep now, Robert said, brushing a curl from Lucas's forehead. Sophie will be here in the morning. I promise. After tucking Lucas in, Robert retreated to his study, and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. The events of the evening had shattered his understanding of his son's condition, his wife's death, perhaps even his own identity as a father. If Sophie was indeed his daughter, Claire's daughter, what did that mean? That someone had stolen her at birth? That medical personnel had lied, falsified records, separated twins? Why so? And what had Sophie endured these past 6 years while her brother grew up in luxury? Catherine found him staring out the window at the snow-covered city, Gotch untouched. "You believe her," she said. Not a question. "I don't know what to believe. But Lucas is talking, Catherine. 6 years of silence, and tonight he can't stop talking. Something extraordinary is happening, and Sophie is at the center of it." Catherine sank into the leather chair opposite his desk. The birthmarks, the resemblance to Claire, it's compelling, Robert. But we need hard evidence before we proceed. DNA, hospital records. If this child is truly your daughter, truly Lucas's twin, then someone has committed crimes beyond imagination, Robert finished grimly. "Someone took my child, Catherine, and they let me believe she never existed." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "There's something else we need to consider. If Sophie is Lucas's twin, identical twins, that's not possible with a boy and a girl. Identical twins are always the same sex." "Not always," came Dr. Richards' voice from the doorway. She had returned, carrying medical journals and a laptop. "I've been researching since I left. It's exceptionally rare, but it can happen when identical twins experience sex chromosome anomalies." She entered the study and spread her materials across Robert's desk. A single fertilized egg splits, creating identical twins. But in extremely rare cases, one twin can lose a Y chromosome or experience other genetic variations that result in a female, while the other remains male. "How rare?" Catherine asked. "There are fewer than 10 documented cases in modern medical literature," Dr. Richards admitted, "but it's theoretically possible." She looked at Robert directly. Was Claire's pregnancy difficult? Complications? Robert closed his eyes, memory washing over him. "Yes, the final months were challenging. She was on bed rest. The delivery was emergency. She hemorrhaged severely." Dr. Richards nodded slowly. "That's consistent with high-risk multiple births." She hesitated, then continued. "Robert, if these children are indeed identical twins separated at birth, it might explain Lucas's condition. There's a controversial theory about neurological connections between identical twins, particularly those who shared a single amniotic sac." "Meaning?" Robert asked. "Meaning that the separation itself, the trauma of being divided from his twin, might have caused Lucas's verbal apraxia. It's almost as if half of him was missing," Robert whispered, echoing Lucas's words. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through fresh snow. Robert had barely slept, his mind racing with questions, theories, and increasingly dark suspicions. He found the children already awake, sitting cross-legged on Lucas's bedroom floor, surrounded by architectural drawings. "Sophie's good at math," Lucas announced when he noticed his father in the doorway. "She can calculate load-bearing requirements in her head." Sophie ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise but clearly pleased. She had adapted to her surroundings with remarkable speed, though Robert noticed she still kept food close by, a banana and granola bar likely taken from the kitchen at some point during the night. The DNA collection team arrived at 9, followed shortly by Dr. Richards with her equipment. The children submitted to cheek swabs and electrodes with varying degrees of cooperation. Lucas with scientific curiosity, Sophie with wary resignation. "The EEG results are fascinating," Dr. Richards told Robert privately while the children ate breakfast. "Their brainwave patterns show remarkable similarities, particularly in the language processing centers. But what's truly extraordinary is how they respond to each other. When Lucas speaks, Sophie's brain activity mirrors his exactly. When Sophie moves, Lucas's motor cortex fires in the same pattern." "What does that mean?" Robert asked. "I'm not entirely sure. It could be evidence of what some researchers call neural resonance, a phenomenon occasionally observed in identical twins with unusually strong bonds. Their brains essentially operate in harmony, like instruments playing the same piece of music." Before Robert could process this, his phone rang. The hospital administrator responding to his urgent request for Claire's complete medical records. Mr. Westbrook, I've reviewed the files personally. There are inconsistencies that concern me. What kind of inconsistencies? Robert demanded. The ultrasound reports from week 18 note twin gestation suspected, but all subsequent documentation references only a single fetus, and the surgical notes from the C-section are unusually vague. Who was the attending physician? Dr. Gregory Phillips, but I should mention, Mr. Westbrook, that Dr. Phillips died in a car accident about 6 months after your son's birth. Robert felt cold certainty settle in his bones. And the head nurse on duty that night? A pause. Vanessa Carter. She left the hospital shortly after Dr. Phillips' death. No forwarding information in her file. After ending the call, Robert found Catherine in the kitchen, watching the children with a complex expression. The hospital records show discrepancies, he told her quietly. Initial indication of twins, then suddenly only one baby. The doctor who delivered Lucas died in a suspicious accident. The head nurse disappeared. Catherine's face paled. You think someone deliberately took Sophie? Falsified records? But why? Who would do such a thing? Robert had no answers, only growing rage and determination. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. The final piece fell into place that afternoon when the DNA results were rushed through, expedited by the Westbrook name and Robert's considerable influence. Probability of full sibling relationship, 99.998%, the technician reported over the phone. And the genetic markers indicate identical twins or with a rare chromosomal variation in the female subject. Robert stood at the window of his penthouse, watching snowflakes swirl against the glass as Lucas and Sophie built an elaborate structure from blocks on the living room floor. The evidence was irrefutable now. The little girl he had found shivering in an alley was his daughter. His and Claire's daughter. Lucas's identical twin. Someone had stolen her at birth, erased her existence from the records, and left her to suffer while her brother languished in silence without her. That same someone had potentially played a role in Claire's death. Catherine joined him at the window, placing a gentle hand on his arm. The media has gotten wind of this. There are reporters gathering downstairs. We need to get the children somewhere private while we figure out what to do next. Robert nodded, decision made. Have the jet prepared. We're going to the Cape Cod house. And Catherine, contact James Sullivan. Your security chief? Yes, and tell him to find Vanessa Carter, the nurse who was there the night the twins were born. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I need to know who took my daughter. That night, as snowflakes danced in the glow of security lights outside the Cape Cod estate, Robert checked on the children one last time before bed. He found them both in Sophie's room, asleep on opposite sides of the massive four-poster bed, yet angled toward each other as if even in sleep they maintained their connection. As he watched his children, both his children, Robert Westbrook made a vow. He would uncover every detail of the conspiracy that had torn his family apart. He would find everyone responsible for taking his daughter and silencing his son, and he would make them pay. Robert was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost missed it. Both children suddenly twitching in their sleep at exactly the same moment, their peaceful expressions transforming into identical masks of fear. Twin nightmares, perfectly synchronized. The cold room, Sophie murmured in her sleep. The machines. The man with silver hair watching through the glass, Lucas continued, though still asleep. Robert felt his blood run cold. What memories haunted his children? What had they experienced that could link them across 6 years of separation? He had a feeling the answers would be far more sinister than he could imagine. January snow blanketed the Cape Cod estate, transforming the sprawling Victorian mansion into a frosted gingerbread house against steel gray skies. 3 days had passed since Robert Westbrook had brought the children to this secluded sanctuary. 3 days of watching Lucas transform from a silent shadow into an animated, talkative boy. 3 days of observing Sophie cautiously explore her new surroundings, her street-honed instincts slowly yielding to childish wonder. Robert stood at the window of his study, watching the twins build a snowman on the expansive rear lawn. Despite Sophie's initial wariness around the estate's security personnel, she had adapted with remarkable speed. She still hoarded food in her pockets and startled at sudden movements, but each hour seemed to peel away another layer of her defensive armor. His phone vibrated against the antique desk. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. "The DNA results have been verified by a second lab," she said without preamble. "No question, Robert. Sophie is your daughter, Lucas's identical twin." Though he had already accepted this truth in his heart, the scientific confirmation sent a fresh wave of emotion through him. And the hospital investigation? James has made progress. The medical records were definitely altered. Initial documentation shows Claire was carrying the twins, but someone systematically removed all references after her 20-week appointment with Dr. Phillips. Robert's jaw tightened. The same doctor who had died suspiciously 6 months after the twins' birth. The same doctor who had failed to save Claire. "There's more," Catherine continued. "Phillips paid off his mortgage and purchased a vacation home in Vermont 2 months after the twins were born. The source of funds is untraceable, but the timing, too convenient," Robert finished. "And Vanessa Carter?" "James found her. She's living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Small house, keeps to herself. He says she seemed frightened when he mentioned your name." "Book the jet. I'm going to pay Ms. Carter a visit." "Robert?" Catherine hesitated. "There's someone here to see you. Megan Palmer. She says it's urgent." Robert frowned. Megan had been his executive assistant for 3 years following Claire's death, eventually becoming more than that during a brief period of personal weakness. Their relationship had ended when Robert realized he was simply seeking comfort, not connection. They had parted on civil terms, with Megan accepting a generous severance package and moving to California for a fresh start. Or so he'd thought. "Send her away, Catherine. I can't deal with personal matters now." "She's quite insistent. Says it concerns Claire's research." Robert froze. Claire's research? Megan had never shown any interest in Claire's neurogenetics work during their relationship. In fact, she had carefully steered conversations away from his late wife. "Fine. Put her in the guest cottage. I'll speak with her after the children are asleep." Through the window, Robert watched Lucas attempt to teach Sophie how to make a snow angel. His son's laughter carried across the frozen landscape, a sound Robert had never heard before Sophie's appearance. Each new expression of joy felt like both a miracle and an accusation. What might Lucas's childhood have been like if he had grown up with his twin? What suffering might Sophie have been spared? The children came in for lunch, cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. Sophie had developed a habit of inspecting each room upon entering, her eyes cataloging exits and potential weapons, behaviors no 7-year-old should have learned. Lucas, by contrast, moved through the world with the confidence of a child who had never known true danger. Their differences were a stark reminder of their separate paths. "The Richards called," Robert told them as they shed snow-crusted boots in the mudroom. "She'll be arriving tomorrow with some specialized equipment to study your brainwaves." Lucas nodded, already familiar with neurological testing. "She wants to see our neural resonance." The technical term, used so casually by a 6-year-old who had been nonverbal days ago, gave Robert pause. "Where did you hear that term, Lucas?" The boy shrugged. "I read her notes yesterday. Sophie and I have synchronous brain activity patterns." Sophie looked up from carefully arranging her borrowed boots. "It means our brains talk to each other without words. That's why Lucas couldn't talk before. His words were with me." The simple explanation sent a chill down Robert's spine. Dr. Richards had posited something similar, that the twins' separation had somehow fractured their neurological development, that Lucas's verbal abilities had been compromised while Sophie developed normally in that area. After lunch, Catherine arrived with a children's tutor to assess Sophie's educational level. Despite years without formal schooling, the girl displayed extraordinary mathematical abilities and reading comprehension well beyond her years. Her knowledge had gaps: history, science, geography, but her raw intelligence was undeniable. "She's remarkable," the tutor told Robert privately. "With proper instruction, she could easily catch up to grade level within months." As evening approached, Robert noticed Lucas growing increasingly agitated. The boy kept glancing toward the windows, his earlier carefree demeanor replaced by tension. "What's wrong, son?" Robert asked, kneeling to eye level. Lucas hesitated, then whispered, "Someone bad is here." Before Robert could respond, Sophie appeared at Lucas's side, her posture protective. "The lady with the red coat," she said quietly. "She's watching the house from the trees." Robert straightened, instantly alert. What lady? Where did you see her? From upstairs, Sophie pointed to the second floor, by the big pine tree. She was looking at us with those small glasses. Lucas feels it too. Robert signaled to James Sullivan, his security chief, who immediately dispatched men to check the perimeter. The children remained unnaturally still, Lucas pressing closer to Sophie as if seeking protection. 10 minutes later, James returned. We found footprints by the north edge of the property, sir. Someone was definitely watching the house. They're gone now. Increase security, Robert ordered. No one gets near the children. After the twins were settled for bed, Robert made his way to the guest cottage where Megan Palmer waited. The small Cape Cod-style building sat 100 yards from the main house, its windows glowing with warm light against the deepening twilight. Megan opened the door at his knock, her familiar perfume, something expensive with notes of jasmine, enveloping him briefly as she stepped back to let him enter. At 42, she remained strikingly attractive, with sharp features and calculating eyes partially hidden behind designer glasses. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, and she wore a deep red wool coat over a black dress. A red coat, like the one Sophie had described. Robert, Megan's voice held practiced warmth. Thank you for seeing me. I came as soon as I heard about the children. How exactly did you hear? Robert remained standing, maintaining distance. We've kept this out of the media. Megan waved a dismissive hand. I still have contacts at Westbrook Capital. News travels. Finding your long-lost daughter, it's quite the story. What do you want, Megan? Catherine said you mentioned Claire's research. Something flickered in Megan's eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or caution. Yes, when we were together, you rarely spoke about Claire's work, but I've since learned she was pioneering research on neurological development in twins. Given your situation now, I thought it might be relevant. And how would you know about the specifics of Claire's research? Robert kept his voice neutral, despite his growing suspicion. You never met her? Megan's smile tightened fractionally. Professional interest. I've moved into pharmaceutical investments since leaving Westbrook Capital. Neural research is a hot sector. She paused, studying him. You look tired, Robert. This must be overwhelming. Discovering your son has a twin, dealing with a street child who claims to be your daughter. She is my daughter. DNA confirmed it. Of course, Megan nodded sympathetically, and I want to help. My company has connections to top child psychologists, specialists in trauma and attachment. The girl will need extensive therapy, structure, boundaries. I'd be happy to arrange consultations. Her name is Sophie, Robert said coldly, and we have access to the best specialists in the country. Sophie, yes. Megan's gaze drifted to the window toward the main house. Such a pretty name. Does she look like Claire? The question, delivered with an undertone Robert couldn't quite identify, raised his hackles. Why are you really here, Megan? We haven't spoken in over a year. Megan stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. I care about you, Robert. Always have. When I heard about this situation, I worried. Taking in a street child is complicated enough, but the circumstances, they're extraordinary. I thought you might need support from someone who knows you. Someone who isn't caught up in the Westbrook family drama. Robert gently removed her hand. Thank you for your concern, but we're managing. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been a long day. Disappointment flashed across Megan's features, quickly masked. Of course, I'm staying at the Harbor Inn in town if you change your mind. Sometimes an outside perspective helps. She gathered her belongings, pausing at the door. They must be remarkable children. Claire would be proud. The casual mention of Claire, delivered with such calculated intimacy, sent warning signals through Robert's mind. As he watched Megan walk toward her rental car, he pulled out his phone. James, I need a background check on Megan Palmer. Everything, educational history, employment records before Westbrook Capital, personal connections. And I want someone watching her while she's in town. That night, Robert checked on the children one last time before retiring. Lucas was sleeping peacefully, but Sophie's bed was empty. A moment of panic seized him until he spotted her small form curled in the window seat, staring out at the moonlit grounds. You should be asleep, he said softly, approaching. Sophie didn't look away from the window. She's still out there. Who? The lady with the red coat. She's hiding, but she's watching. Robert followed her gaze but saw only shadows among the trees. The security team checked the grounds, Sophie. There's no one there. Sophie turned to him then, her young face serious in the moonlight. Lucas doesn't like her. He's afraid of her. Did Lucas tell you that? He didn't need to. Sophie tapped her temple. I can feel it, in here. Robert sat beside her on the window seat, choosing his words carefully. Sophie, the lady in the red coat, Megan. She used to work for me. Lucas has never met her before. He can't be afraid of someone he doesn't know. Sophie considered this, then said with the simple certainty of a child, she's not who she says she is, and she wants to take us away. The statement, delivered without drama or embellishment, chilled Robert more than any adult warning could have. Before he could respond, Sophie continued, you should go to bed now. You have to fly tomorrow to find the nurse lady. Robert stared at her. How did you know about that? Sophie shrugged. Lucas heard you talking to Aunt Catherine. He was worried, so he told me. She slid off the window seat and padded back to her bed. Don't worry, I'll watch Lucas while you're gone. The absolute confidence in her voice, a 7-year-old promising to protect her twin, twisted something in Robert's chest. Sophie had been caring for herself on Boston's winter streets, while his security team watched over Lucas in heated comfort. She had survived by her wits while her brother struggled in silence. As he watched her climb into bed, Robert made a silent vow. Neither of his children would ever need to protect themselves again. That was his job now, a job he had failed at once already. The journey to Arizona passed in a blur of private jets and luxury SUVs. By afternoon, Robert found himself on a quiet street in Scottsdale, staring at a modest stucco house with carefully tended desert landscaping. Vanessa Carter lived in deliberate anonymity. No social media presence, no community involvement, nothing to connect her to the prestigious Boston Memorial Hospital, where she had once served as head maternity nurse. She opened the door to his knock, recognition and fear immediately flooding her face. In her late 50s now, Vanessa had aged considerably since the hospital photos James had shown him. Gray hair pulled back severely, shoulders hunched as if perpetually bracing for impact. Mr. Westbrook, she said, her voice barely audible. I wondered when you'd come. Inside, the house was immaculate, religious iconography hanging alongside nursing certificates. Everything precisely arranged, controlled, the home of someone clinging to order in the face of chaos. You know why I'm here, Robert said, refusing the offered seat. He had no intention of making this conversation comfortable. Vanessa perched on the edge of an armchair, hands twisting in her lap. I saw the news about your daughter, about the twins. My daughter, Robert repeated, the words still strange on his tongue. The daughter who was stolen from me. The daughter I never knew existed because you helped erase her. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes, but Robert felt no sympathy. He had spent the 6-hour flight imagining what Sophie had endured, hunger, fear, abandonment, while he lived in ignorance of her existence. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Vanessa whispered. She was supposed to go to a good home, to people who would love her. Tell me everything, Robert demanded, from the beginning. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. Dr. Phillips approached me a week before your wife's due date. He said there was a wealthy couple who couldn't conceive, who were willing to pay for a healthy newborn with the right pedigree. Pedigree? Robert spat the word. Your family background, Harvard education, your wife's artistic talents and beauty. Vanessa couldn't meet his eyes. $2 million, that was the price. Robert struggled to contain his rage. You sold my child for $2 million. The baby would have every advantage, a loving home with parents who desperately wanted a child. She ended up on the streets, Robert said coldly, abandoned by her foster family, begging for food outside restaurants, at 7 years old. Vanessa flinched. That wasn't supposed to happen. The Blackwoods were vetted thoroughly. The Blackwoods, not the Petersons? Confusion crossed her face. No, Richard and Diana Blackwood from Greenwich. They paid cash through Dr. Phillips's arrangement. Robert's mind raced. If Sophie had originally gone to the Blackwoods, how had she ended up with the Petersons? And who were these Petersons she spoke of? Tell me about the birth, Robert demanded. Vanessa's gaze grew distant. When your wife started hemorrhaging, Everything happened so fast. Emergency C-section. Two babies came, the boy with breathing difficulties, the girl perfectly healthy. She swallowed hard. Dr. Phillips falsified the records to show only one birth while I took the girl. You stole my daughter while I sat with my dying wife. Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. Dr. Phillips said you'd never know. That with your wife's condition, you were focused entirely on her. He said one child would be enough for a man like you. A man like me, rage boiled inside Robert. Wealthy, privileged. He said the money would help children who really needed it. Vanessa's voice cracked. I told myself it was for the greater good. But the money didn't go to children in need, did it? It went to Phillips's mortgage and your new life here. Robert gestured to the house around them. Vanessa's silence was confirmation enough. Did you know Phillips deliberately delayed treatment that could have saved my wife? Shock registered on Vanessa's face. What? No, that can't be true. Someone paid him to let Claire die. Was that part of your agreement too? No. Vanessa stood abruptly, genuine horror in her expression. I wouldn't have, not murder. Robert studied her, weighing her reaction. He believed her. This part of the conspiracy at least had been beyond her knowledge. What happened to the Blackwoods? Why did Sophie end up with people called the Petersons? I don't know. After the handoff, I never contacted them. It was safer that way. As Robert walked back to his waiting car, his phone rang. Catherine's number flashed on the screen. Robert, you need to come home, she said, her voice tight with worry. The FBI found Lillian Barrett, the Blackwoods nanny. I'll be on the next flight. What did she say? She claims the Blackwoods were murdered, that their boating accident was engineered because they discovered something about Sophie's origins, something that put them all in danger. Did she say what they discovered? She'll only discuss it with you, but Robert, Catherine paused. She says it concerns Claire's death as well. Robert felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath him. Claire's death had been attributed to complications from childbirth. A tragedy, but not suspicious. What possible connection could exist between her death and the Blackwoods accident nearly a year later? There's something else, Catherine added. Claire's mother, Jennifer, arrived this morning. She saw Sophie on the news and came immediately. Robert, she nearly fainted when she saw Sophie. Says she's identical to Claire at that age. Keep everyone at the estate. Double security. I'm on my way. The return flight gave Robert time to process what he had learned. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate scheme, stealing Sophie at birth, falsifying medical records, and potentially causing Claire's death. But why? What possible motive could justify such calculated cruelty? And now Megan Palmer had mysteriously appeared, claiming interest in Claire's research. The coincidence felt increasingly sinister. Robert's instincts, honed through decades of business negotiations, screamed warning. He arrived at the Cape Cod estate well after midnight to find Catherine waiting in the foyer, her face drawn with exhaustion. The children? Robert asked immediately. Asleep, they're fine, though Lucas has been agitated all day, keeps asking when you'll return. And Jennifer? In the East guest room. She's overwhelmed, Robert. Seeing Sophie hit her hard. Robert nodded, fatigue washing over him. We'll talk in the morning. I need to see the children first. He moved quietly through the darkened house to the twins' adjoining rooms. Lucas slept soundly, but again Sophie's bed was empty. Panic flared until he spotted her curled in Lucas's reading chair, keeping watch over her brother even in sleep. The sight squeezed Robert's heart. Only 7 years old, yet Sophie had appointed herself Lucas's protector. How many nights had she spent like this on the streets, alert even in sleep, ready to defend herself from threats? As if sensing his presence, Sophie's eyes opened. You're back, she whispered, careful not to wake Lucas. I am, Robert confirmed softly. You should be in your own bed. Lucas was scared. He knew you were finding out bad things. Sophie stretched, cat-like, and then patted across to her brother's bed. She gently brushed a curl from his forehead, and Lucas settled deeper into sleep at her touch. Did you find the nurse lady? Yes, she told me some important things about when you were born. Sophie nodded solemnly. Good. Lucas will feel better tomorrow then. Robert escorted her back to her own room, struck by the strange role reversal. This child, who had survived unimaginable hardship, was comforting him. "Sophie, why aren't you afraid? After everything that's happened to you?" She considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness. "I was afraid before, all the time. But now I found Lucas, and he found his words, and you found us both." She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. "Besides, I know you'll keep the bad lady away." "What bad lady, Sophie?" "The one who's been watching us our whole lives, the one who wants to take us back to the cold room." She yawned, eyes drifting closed. "But you won't let her." The absolute trust in her voice felt like both a gift and a terrible burden. Robert stayed until her breathing deepened into sleep, then made his way to his study where Catherine waited with a glass of scotch. "You look terrible," she observed, handing him the drink. "It's worse than we thought," Robert said, sinking into his chair. Vanessa Carter confirmed everything: the twins' birth, the falsified records, the sale of Sophie to the Blackwoods. But she knew nothing about Claire's death being suspicious or what happened to the Blackwoods afterward. "The FBI has been interviewing Lillian Barrett all day. They say her story checks out. Employment records with the Blackwoods, neighbors who remember her and Sophie. She went into hiding after their deaths, convinced she was in danger." "What about Megan? Did you run the background check?" Catherine nodded, opening a folder on the desk. "Megan Palmer's employment history before Westbrook Capital is spotty at best. She claimed degrees from Stanford and Johns Hopkins, but we can only verify Stanford. The hospital where she supposedly worked before joining your company has no record of her employment." Robert's suspicion deepened. "She mentioned knowing about Claire's research yesterday. That never came up during our relationship." "Because she never mentioned knowing Claire," Catherine finished, "which is odd considering she now claims professional interest in Claire's work." Morning brought bright sunlight and the arrival of Dr. Richards with her specialized equipment. The neurologist set up in the estate's library, transforming the elegant space into a temporary laboratory. Jennifer Pierce, Claire's mother, watched the preparations with visible anxiety. At 70, Jennifer retained traces of the beauty she had passed to her daughter: high cheekbones, expressive eyes, delicate hands constantly in motion. Meeting Sophie had visibly shaken her, reopening grief she had thought long settled. "She looks so much like Claire," Jennifer whispered to Robert as they watched the twins enter. "It's uncanny." Sophie approached Jennifer cautiously, studying the older woman with obvious interest. "You're my grandmother," she stated rather than asked. Jennifer nodded, tears welling. "Yes, dear, I'm your mother's mother. Did my mother have red hair? And did she sing songs about the moon and stars?" Jennifer gasped softly. "Yes, Claire had beautiful auburn hair, and she always sang that lullaby. Her father taught it to her when she was small." Sophie nodded, satisfied with the confirmation of some inner knowledge. "I remember the lady with red hair singing to us before we were born." The simple statement sent a chill through the room. Dr. Richards exchanged glances with Robert, their shared scientific skepticism challenged by the twins' unexplainable memories. "That's not possible," Jennifer said gently. "You couldn't remember that, sweetheart." Lucas, who had been examining Dr. Richards' equipment, joined the conversation. "We do remember. We remember the dark and the singing and being together, and then the cold and the bright lights and being separated." Dr. Richards intervened smoothly. "Let's begin the testing, shall we? Lucas, Sophie, I need you both to wear these special caps with sensors. They'll help us see how your brains work together." As the neurologist attached electrodes and calibrated equipment, Jennifer pulled Robert aside. "There's something you should know. Something I've never told anyone. About Claire's work before she met you." Robert felt a prickle of apprehension. "What about it?" "Claire wasn't just studying neurological development. She was specifically researching twins. Identical twins with unusual mental connections. She called it neural resonance, the same term Dr. Richards used yesterday. I knew she was a neurogeneticist, but she rarely discussed the specifics of her research with me." Jennifer's fingers twisted together anxiously. "She had a research partner, Victoria Andrews. Brilliant woman, but Claire never fully trusted her. Said Victoria was too focused on results, not ethics. They had some kind of falling out about a year before Claire met you." "Victoria Andrews," Robert repeated, something nagging at his memory. Did you ever meet her? Once, at a university function, striking woman, dark hair, very intense, wore distinctive round glasses. Claire said she had a background in both neuroscience and genetics. Rare combination. Round glasses, like Megan's. Dark hair, like Megan's. Jennifer, do you have any photos of this Victoria Andrews? No, but there might be some in Claire's research materials. Did you keep those after she died? Robert nodded slowly. Everything is in her lab at the Cambridge house. I never had the heart to clear it out. Across the room, Dr. Richards was staring at her monitoring equipment with undisguised amazement. Robert, you need to see this. On the screen, two brain scans displayed side by side showed nearly identical patterns of activity. As Lucas spoke, Sophie's language centers lit up in perfect synchronization. When Sophie moved her hand, the motor cortex in Lucas's brain activated as if he were making the same movement. I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Richards breathed. Their neural patterns are so closely aligned, it's as if they're operating on a shared frequency. This goes beyond what we typically observe, even in the closest identical twins. Lucas, watching the screens with scientific curiosity, nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. It's why I couldn't talk before. My words were with Sophie. And why I could feel when he was swamped or scared, Sophie added, even when I didn't know who he was. Dr. Richards adjusted some settings, her scientific enthusiasm barely contained. The implications are extraordinary. If twins can develop this level of neurological synchronization, it opens up entirely new understanding of brain development and communication. As the testing continued, Lucas asked for drawing materials. While still connected to the monitoring equipment, he began sketching with remarkable precision. Sophie watched, occasionally suggesting details without seeing the paper. When Lucas finished, he handed the drawing to Robert. The detailed illustration showed a laboratory with medical equipment, observation windows, and two infant beds separated by a glass partition. In the corner stood a figure with distinctive round glasses and dark hair pulled back severely. The cold room, Lucas explained, where the bad doctor watched us through the glass. Robert stared at the drawing, his blood running cold. The woman depicted was unmistakably similar to Megan Palmer. Dr. Richards peered at the screen showing the twins' brain activity. Robert, look at this. While Lucas was drawing, both their visual corticas were equally active. It's as if they were sharing the same mental image. That's impossible, Robert whispered. Sophie wasn't even looking at the paper. I didn't need to, Sophie said matter-of-factly. I see what Lucas sees sometimes, and he hears what I hear. Jennifer had gone pale, staring at the drawing. Robert, that woman, she looks like Victoria Andrews, Claire's research partner. Before Robert could respond, James Sullivan appeared at the doorway, his expression grave. Sir, we found something. The security team checking Miss Palmer's background discovered she maintained an apartment in Boston under a different name, Victoria Andrews. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Megan Palmer was Victoria Andrews, Claire's former research partner, the woman who had insinuated herself into Robert's life after Claire's death, the woman who had apparently been watching the twins for years. Where is she now? Robert demanded. Gone, sir. Checked out of the Harbor Inn this morning, but there's more. James handed Robert a tablet displaying a security camera footage. This was taken 2 hours ago on the north perimeter of the property. The grainy video showed a figure in a red coat moving through the trees, surveying the estate with binoculars. Megan Palmer, Victoria Andrews, watching his children. Robert turned to Jennifer, trying to keep his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. Tell me everything you know about Victoria Andrews' research with Claire. Everything. Jennifer hesitated, glancing at the twins who were now watching the adults with obvious concern. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Lucas said firmly, removing the electrode cap. We need to know. It's about us. Sophie nodded in agreement. The lady in the red coat. She's been in our dreams our whole lives, the one who watched us in the cold room. Jennifer sank into a chair, visibly distressed. Claire and Victoria were studying neural development in identical twins, specifically the phenomenon where twins develop complementary cognitive abilities. One verbal, one mathematical, one creative, one analytical. Specialized brain development, Robert murmured, scanning Lucas's drawing again. Yes, They theorized that by exposing identical twins to different environmental stimuli during critical developmental periods, they could engineer enhanced cognitive specialization. Jennifer twisted her hands. But it was theoretical research based on animal studies. Claire was explicit about the ethical barriers to human application. De Richards had gone very still, her scientific excitement replaced by growing horror. Are you suggesting Victoria Andrews saw Claire's pregnancy with twins as an opportunity to test these theories on human subjects? Jennifer nodded, tears welling. Claire discovered financial irregularities in their lab accounts about 6 months before she met you, Robert. She suspected Victoria was funneling research funds into a secondary project she wouldn't discuss. They had a serious falling out. Claire was considering dissolving their partnership. And then Claire met me, got pregnant, and discovered she was carrying twins, Robert continued, the terrible picture becoming clearer. Did she tell Victoria about the twins? I don't know. Claire was very private about her pregnancy, especially after the early complications. She was on bed rest for the final trimester. Lucas had moved closer to Sophie, the two children standing shoulder to shoulder as they absorbed the adults' conversation. She wanted to hurt us, Lucas said quietly, to see what would happen to our brains if we were separated. She's still watching us, Sophie added. She wants to finish her experiment. Robert knelt before his children, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Listen to me, both of you. No one is going to hurt you. No one is going to separate you again, I promise. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, then nodded in unison. Robert stood, turning to James. I want the security team doubled. No one enters or leaves the property without clearance. And I need to get to Cambridge, to Claire's laboratory. There might be evidence there about what Victoria was planning. I'll go with you, Dr. Richards offered. If there's research data, I can help interpret it. Robert nodded, then turned to Catherine. Stay with the children. Don't let them out of your sight. As preparations were made for the journey to Cambridge, Robert checked his phone and found a missed call from an unknown number. A voicemail notification blinked on the screen. He pressed play, holding the phone to his ear. Robert, Megan's voice, Victoria's voice, smooth and controlled. I see you've been digging into the past. Inconvenient, but not unexpected. Claire was always too sentimental about family, a weakness I don't share. The twins are extraordinary, aren't they? Such unique neurological development, such perfect complementary specialization. My theory was correct all along. Robert's hand tightened around the phone as Victoria continued. I've been patient, Robert. 7 years of careful observation, documentation, analysis, the street child and the silent boy, two halves of the same cognitive whole. But now it's time to conclude the experiment properly. Don't worry about Sophie and Lucas. They'll be well cared for. After all, they're the most important research subjects in the history of neuroscience. The message ended with Victoria's soft laughter. Cold sweat broke out on Robert's forehead as he rushed back toward the library. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He found Catherine on the floor of the library, a nasty bruise forming on her temple. Dr. Richards was helping her sit up, medical training taking over. The children, Catherine gasped, clutching her head. She took the children. Victoria, she had a gun. Robert's world collapsed around him. The security cameras showed it all. Victoria Andrews entering through a service door, incapacitating 2 guards with what appeared to be tranquilizer darts, then confronting Catherine in the library. The twins had been let out at gunpoint, Lucas trying to shield Sophie, Sophie's face set in determined fury. In Robert's study, a handwritten note waited on his desk. They are mine. Claire stole my research. Now I will complete it. As FBI agents swarmed the estate, Robert stood at the window, a cold certainty settling in his bones. Victoria Andrews had been watching his children for years, studying them like laboratory specimens. Now she had taken them to continue her twisted experiment. Robert Westbrook, who had built his fortune by calculating risks and managing threats, faced the most devastating loss of his life. His children, both his children, were in the hands of a woman who viewed them not as human beings, but as research subjects. A woman who had potentially orchestrated Claire's death and now threatened everything Robert had left. He made a silent vow as he stared out at the snow-covered grounds. He would find Victoria Andrews. He would rescue his children. And he would make her pay for every moment of suffering she had caused his family. The hunt had begun. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the Adirondack Mountains. Moonlight filtered through heavy clouds, casting ghostly shadows on the frozen landscape. Robert Westbrook stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking a remote compound, his breath forming clouds in the bitter February air. Behind him, FBI tactical teams moved with practiced silence through the snow-laden pines. 48 hours had passed since Victoria Andrews had taken the twins. 48 hours of desperate searching, of calling in every favor, of emptying bank accounts to fund the most extensive private manhunt in history. The investigation had led them here, to a secluded research facility nestled deep in the wilderness, miles from the nearest town. Special Agent Diana Reeves approached, her dark tactical gear blending with the night. Thermal imaging confirms multiple heat signatures inside the main building, two small figures on the lower level, adult-sized signatures on both floors. Robert nodded, eyes never leaving the compound. The facility was deceptively ordinary, a large central structure with several outbuildings surrounded by a high-security fence. Only the extensive camera systems and motion sensors betrayed its true purpose. "How long until we move in?" he asked, voice rough from exhaustion. 20 minutes. We need to disable their security system first." Reeves hesitated, then added, "Mr. Westbrook, I need to remind you that you're here as an observer only. When we go in—" "I know," Robert interrupted. "I stay back until you secure the scene." He had agreed to the condition when the FBI allowed him to accompany the raid, though they both knew it was a promise he might not keep. Not with his children inside. The past 2 days had revealed Victoria Andrews' elaborate deception. After Claire's death, she had meticulously orchestrated her entry into Robert's life as Megan Palmer, gathering intelligence on Lucas while monitoring Sophie from afar. The Blackwoods' fatal accident had been engineered when they discovered irregularities in Sophie's adoption. The Petersons, Sophie's subsequent foster family, had been paid to provide minimal care while continuing Victoria's controlled environment experiment until Martin Peterson's arrest disrupted the arrangement. Most disturbing were the discoveries in Claire's laboratory in Cambridge. Journals revealed that Claire had uncovered Victoria's unauthorized twin research months before her death. She had been building a case against her former partner when she discovered her own pregnancy involved twins, a coincidence Victoria had seen as an opportunity too perfect to ignore. "We're ready." Robert turned to find James Sullivan approaching, armed and dressed in tactical gear, matching the FBI teams. His security chief had insisted on participating in the rescue operation. "The FBI has agreed to let me join the entry team," James said quietly. "I'll find the twins, sir, I promise." Robert clasped the man's shoulder, unable to speak his gratitude. In the distance, the faint sound of helicopter rotors broke the mountain silence. Victoria's escape plan, perhaps, or reinforcements. Agent Reeves touched her earpiece, listening to incoming communications. "We need to move now. Their systems just detected our presence." The tactical teams surged forward, dark shapes against the snow. Robert followed at the prescribed distance, heart pounding against his ribs. Somewhere in that compound were his children, children he had only just found, only just begun to know. The raid unfolded with controlled precision. Security systems disabled, gates breached, doors forced open. The main building's floodlights suddenly blazed to life, casting harsh illumination across the snow. Shouts echoed through the cold air as agents secured the perimeter. Robert pushed forward, ignoring Reeves's order to stay back. Inside the main building, chaos reigned. Staff in lab coats were being detained, computers seized, documents secured. He followed the flow of agents heading toward the lower levels, driven by instinct and desperation. The facility transformed as they descended, sterile corridors giving way to a sophisticated laboratory complex. Through glass windows, Robert glimpsed what appeared to be medical examination rooms, observation chambers, and testing facilities. A sudden commotion erupted ahead. Gunfire. Shouting. Robert broke into a run, all caution abandoned. He rounded a corner to find agents clustered outside a sealed door. Through a small window, he could see a laboratory space with medical equipment and monitoring stations. At the center stood Victoria Andrews, a syringe in one hand, the other arm wrapped around Sophie. Lucas stood a few feet away, frozen in place, eyes locked on his twin. "She's threatening to inject the girl if we breach," an agent reported tersely. "Claims it's a neurotoxin that will cause permanent brain damage." Robert pushed forward. "Let me talk to her." "Absolutely not," Reeves blocked his path. "She's unstable. We have negotiators." "Those are my children," Robert's voice cut like steel. "And she's been studying them their entire lives. She knows I'm here. She wants to talk to me." A tense standoff followed, broken only when Victoria's voice came through the intercom. "Send in Robert, alone, or I demonstrate exactly how specialized these children's neural pathways have become." Reeves reluctantly stood aside. "We'll be watching. Any sign she's going to hurt either child, we come in hard." Robert nodded, then straightened his shoulders and entered the laboratory. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Victoria stood beneath harsh fluorescent lights, looking remarkably composed despite the circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, white lab coat pristine. The round glasses reflected the light, momentarily obscuring her eyes. "Robert," she acknowledged coolly. "Right on schedule." Sophie remained still within Victoria's grasp, but her eyes burned with defiance rather than fear. Lucas had edged closer to them, his posture protective despite his own vulnerability. "Let them go, Victoria," Robert said, voice steady despite the terror gripping his heart. "They're children, not experiments." Victoria's smile was cold. "They're much more than children, Robert. They're living proof of my theory. Neural resonance between identical twins can be manipulated to create specialized cognitive development. Lucas, predominantly spatial mathematical intelligence. Sophie, predominantly verbal emotional intelligence. Two hemispheres of a single extraordinary brain." "They're human beings," Robert countered, taking a careful step forward. "My son and daughter. Claire's children." At Claire's name, something flickered in Victoria's expression. Claire lacked vision. She became squeamish when she saw the real potential of our research. Then she had the audacity to threaten exposure. Victoria tightened her grip on Sophie. She didn't understand what was at stake, the advancement of human cognition itself. Robert took another measured step. "So you arranged her death, made sure Dr. Phillips delayed treatment that could have saved her." "A necessary sacrifice. Claire chose her moment poorly, discovering our financial irregularities while pregnant with the perfect research subjects." Victoria's voice remained clinical, detached. "Phillips was adequately compensated for his cooperation." "Everyone has a price, Robert. Even you." "Not my children," Robert said, edging closer still. "Never my children." Sophie's eyes met his, conveying something urgent. Lucas had shifted positions slightly, his gaze focused intensely on his sister. "The separation was the key experiment," Victoria continued, seemingly eager to explain her methodology now that she had a captive audience. "Neural specialization occurs naturally between twins, but can be dramatically enhanced through controlled separation and targeted cognitive stimulation. Lucas developed extraordinary spatial mathematical abilities while Sophie's verbal emotional intelligence flourished, the perfect cognitive division." "Is that why Lucas couldn't speak? Because you engineered his brain to suppress language?" Victoria nodded, professional pride evident. "Not intentionally at first, but what a fascinating outcome. His verbal functions transferred almost entirely to Sophie, while her mathematical processing became dependent on him. Two incomplete halves of a single cognitive system. When reunited, the neural pathways began re-establishing connections, hence his sudden ability to speak. Robert was close enough now to see the twins' breathing patterns, synchronized, controlled. They were communicating somehow, planning something. "And the other children?" he asked, stalling for time. "The ones you've been monitoring here?" "Other twin pairs, different protocols, different separation variables, all yielding valuable data." Victoria gestured toward the adjacent laboratories with her free hand, the one holding the syringe. "None as successful as Lucas and Sophie, though. Their neural resonance is unprecedented." Sophie's eyes flickered to the syringe, then back to Robert. "A message." "What's in the syringe, Victoria?" he asked quietly. "Insurance, a compound that selectively targets language centers in the brain. If injected into Sophie, it would effectively silence her, permanently. Lucas would likely lose his recently recovered speech as well, given their connected neural pathways. She smiled thinly. A last resort, but I'm prepared to sacrifice some research potential to maintain control of this situation. Lucas took a half step forward. You'd hurt us just to prove you're right? Victoria's attention shifted to him momentarily. Science requires sacrifice, Lucas. Your mother never understood that. My mother tried to stop you, Lucas said, his young voice surprisingly steady, because she knew what you were doing was wrong. Your mother was weak, Victoria snapped, emotion breaking through her clinical facade for the first time. She would have destroyed years of work, squandered a historic opportunity, all for sentimental notions of family and ethics. While Victoria's focus remained on Lucas, Sophie caught Robert's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever the twins were planning was about to happen. You know what's funny? Sophie said suddenly, her clear voice filling the laboratory. For a brain scientist, you're not very smart. Victoria stiffened. Excuse me? You think we're just two halves of a brain, Sophie continued. But we're more than that. We can do things you don't understand. Like talk without words, Lucas added. Like see through each other's eyes. Like this, Sophie said, and suddenly both twins closed their eyes in perfect synchronization. What happened next defied explanation. Victoria gasped, the syringe tumbling from her suddenly to slack fingers. She released Sophie, hands flying to her temples. What are you doing? She whispered, face contorting in confusion. Robert lunged forward, grabbing Sophie and pulling her safely behind him. Lucas rushed to join them, the twins instinctively clasping hands. Victoria staggered backward, eyes wide with shock. How are you in my head? That's impossible. The laboratory door burst open as FBI agents rushed in, securing Victoria and clearing the room. Through it all, the twins maintained their strange, synchronized trance, eyes closed, hands linked. Only when Victoria had been restrained and removed did they finally open their eyes, expressions clearing. What did you do? Robert asked, kneeling before them, hands trembling as he checked them for injuries. Sophie shrugged, the gesture so ordinary after such an extraordinary moment. We showed her our memories, of being in the dark together, of being separated, of being lonely and scared. We made her feel what we felt, Lucas added quietly, all at once. Robert stared at his children, all mingling with lingering fear. Whatever connection existed between them went beyond current scientific understanding, beyond even Victoria's twisted research. Agent Reeves approached, her expression grave. Mr. Westbrook, we've found the other children. 5 pairs of twins, all separated at birth through Victoria's network. We're bringing them up now. The next hours passed in a blur. Medical teams evaluated all the children while FBI agents processed the facility and its staff. The full extent of Victoria's operation emerged with each new discovery. Falsified adoptions, bribed medical personnel, years of secret research conducted on unwitting subjects. Robert remained with Lucas and Sophie as doctors examined them, the twins refusing to be separated even briefly. Dr. Richards arrived with the second wave of personnel, her scientific curiosity tempered by horror at what had been uncovered. Their neural synchronization is unlike anything documented in medical literature, she told Robert privately after reviewing the initial scans. Victoria's notes suggest they developed it as a defense mechanism against the trauma of separation, their brains literally rewiring to maintain connection despite physical distance. Will they be all right? Robert asked, watching the twins through the examination room window. They sat side by side on the edge of a gurney, shoulders touching, completing each other's sentences as they spoke with a counselor. Physically, yes. Neurologically, they're pioneering new territory. Their brains adapted to survive the circumstances they were placed in. With proper support, those adaptations don't have to be limitations. Dawn was breaking when Robert finally gathered his exhausted children and boarded the helicopter that would take them home. As the aircraft rose above the mountains, Sophie pressed her face against the window, watching the facility shrink beneath them. They won't hurt the other twins, will they? She asked, voice small against the rotor noise. No, Robert assured her, arm around her thin shoulders. They'll help them find their families, just like we found each other. Lucas leaned against his other side, eyes heavy with fatigue. Can they stay with us until then? The other twins? They're scared of being separated again. Robert exchanged glances with Agent Reeves across the helicopter cabin. We'll see what we can arrange, he promised, though he knew the process of reuniting the other children with their families would be complicated by years of deception and legal tangles. 3 weeks later, Robert stood on the veranda of a sprawling beachfront property in San Diego, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and rose. The move from Boston had been necessary. Too many memories, too much media attention, too harsh a climate for fresh beginnings. Here, with security discreetly maintained and the children enrolled in a progressive school equipped to handle their unique needs, healing had begun. The nightmare still came, but less frequently now. The hoarding of food, the startled responses to sudden movements, these too were slowly fading as Sophie adjusted to security and abundance. Morning, Dad. Robert turned to find Lucas in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, a architectural sketch pad tucked under his arm. Morning, son. Sleep well? Lucas nodded, settling into a chair and opening his sketchbook. His drawings had evolved from renderings of the cold room to increasingly complex architectural designs. Dr. Richards called it therapeutic, reclaiming control through creativity. Sophie's still sleeping, Lucas reported, pencil moving across paper with practiced precision. She was up late reading again. The casual domestic exchange, so ordinary, so precious, tightened Robert's throat. Just months ago, Lucas had been locked in silence, Sophie surviving on the streets. Now they bickered over bathroom time and television privileges like typical siblings. Inside, phones began ringing as the household staff arrived for the day. Catherine had relocated with them, unwilling to be separated from the children she'd grown to love. Richards consulted regularly, developing a specialized educational program that worked with rather than against the twins' unique neural connection. The legal proceedings against Victoria Andrews and her associates continued, with Robert determined to see justice served for all the affected families. The evidence recovered from the Adirondack facility had proven invaluable, revealing a network of corruption spanning multiple states and institutions. Most significantly, Victoria's private records had confirmed her role in Claire's death. Emails to Dr. Phillips instructing him to delay critical treatment, financial transfers following the successful outcome. Claire had died because she discovered Victoria's unethical research and threatened exposure at the exact moment Victoria coveted her unborn twins as research subjects. The kitchen door slid open, and Sophie emerged carrying a glass of orange juice and a book nearly half her size. At 8 years old, she had gained weight and height, her once hollow cheeks now rounded, her eyes no longer holding the wary calculation of street survival. She still maintained certain habits, checking exits, assessing strangers with careful scrutiny, but these were fading gradually with time and security. Morning, she mumbled, dropping into the chair beside Lucas and automatically correcting an angle on his drawing without looking up from her book. What are you reading now? Robert asked, smiling at the familiar sibling synchronization. Sophie held up the cover, a neuropsychology text well beyond elementary school level. Dr. Richards said I might understand some parts about twin studies. The science is mostly wrong, though. Robert had grown accustomed to such statements from his children. Their insights into their own condition frequently challenged established research, leaving specialists both fascinated and humbled. Jennifer called last night, he mentioned, referring to Claire's mother, who had become a regular presence in their lives. She's sending more of Claire's research journals. Thought you might want to see your mother's original work on neural resonance. Both children looked up at this, interest sparked. Claire had become a bridge between them. The mother Sophie had never known. The mother Lucas had lost before forming conscious memories. Through her research, her journals, her mother's stories, they constructed a sense of connection to the brilliant woman whose genetics they shared. I'd like that, Sophie said quietly. Lucas could understand the math parts better than me. And you could explain the biology better than me, Lucas added. Their complementary abilities a source of cooperation rather than limitation now. The sound of a car approaching drew Robert's attention. The first of the day's visitors, likely Dr. Abrams, the therapist working with all the recovered twin pairs. The Westbrook Foundation, established with a significant portion of Robert's fortune, had funded a comprehensive support program for the children victimized by Victoria's network. Two pairs of twins had already been reunited with their biological families. Three others remained in specialized care while investigations continued. All showed variations of the neural connection exhibited by Lucas and Sophie, though none quite as pronounced. Dr. Abrams is here, Robert announced, recognizing the silver sedan. Do you want to join the session today, or would you prefer some quiet time? The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, a quick glance that contained entire conversations. We'll come, Lucas decided, closing his sketchbook. The Miller twins are still scared of being separated. We promised we'd show them it gets easier. Sophie nodded in agreement. They need to see that different doesn't mean broken. The simple wisdom, delivered with a child's directness, struck Robert forcefully. Different didn't mean broken. His extraordinary children, with their synchronized brainwaves and complementary abilities, weren't damaged by their experiences. They had adapted, evolved, developed strengths precisely because of their challenges. 1 year later, Robert stood on the same veranda, watching a very different scene unfold on the beach below. A dozen children played at the water's edge, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. The twin pairs, all successfully reunited with their biological families now, had gathered for the Westbrook Foundation's annual retreat, a week of therapy, education, and simply being understood among others who shared similar experiences. The parents had formed their own support network, bonded by the shared trauma of discovering children stolen at birth and the complex journey of reintegration. Many had relocated to be near the San Diego Research Center established by the foundation, where Dr. Richards led a team studying neural resonance and developing therapies to help the children maximize their unique cognitive structures. Quite a sight, isn't it? Jennifer Pierce joined Robert at the railing, her aged face softened by the golden California light. At 71, she had moved permanently to San Diego, unwilling to miss a moment with her rediscovered grandchildren. Claire would have loved this, Robert said quietly. Seeing her research used to help children rather than exploit them. She's watching, Jennifer said with simple conviction. I feel her here sometimes, especially when the twins laugh together. Below, Lucas and Sophie were organizing the younger children into teams for a sandcastle competition. At 9 years old, they had blossomed into confident, balanced individuals. Lucas's verbal abilities had fully developed while maintaining his extraordinary spatial mathematical intelligence. Sophie's street-honed resilience had transformed into leadership, her emotional intelligence making her a natural mediator among the other twin pairs. They still shared their unique connection, completing each other's sentences, feeling each other's emotions, occasionally seeing through each other's eyes when the neural resonance peaked. But what Victoria had intended as experimental subjects had instead become pioneers, helping doctors and researchers understand the extraordinary potential of the human brain. Mr. Westbrook? Catherine approached, tablet in hand. The Justice Department call in. Victoria Andrews' appeal has been denied. She'll serve her full sentence. Life without possibility of parole. Robert nodded, satisfaction mixing with lingering anger. No punishment seemed sufficient for the woman who had stolen his daughter, caused his wife's death, and traumatized multiple families. Victoria had maintained her clinical detachment throughout the trial, insisting her research was groundbreaking science that future generations would vindicate. Dad! Sophie's voice carried up from the beach. Come see what we built. Robert excused himself and made his way down the wooden steps to the sand. The children had constructed an elaborate sand structure, not a traditional castle, but a complex series of connected towers and archways. Lucas designed it, Sophie explained proudly, and I organized everyone to build each section. We're calling it Resonance City, Lucas added, carefully smoothing an architectural detail, because everything is connected, even when it looks separate. Robert crouched beside them, examining the intricate creation. It's extraordinary. You've all done amazing work. A small boy from one of the younger twin pairs approached shyly. Mr. Westbrook, is it true that you found your kids even though the bad lady tried to hide them forever? The innocent question, laden with the child's own trauma and hope, momentarily stole Robert's voice. Sophie answered for him, slipping her sand-covered hand into her father's. "He found us because we never stopped looking for each other," she said with the simple certainty that characterized her view of the world. "And because some connections can't ever be broken, no matter how hard someone tries." Lucas nodded in agreement, adding, "Even when we didn't know who we were looking for, we were still looking." I couldn't talk because my words were with Sophie, and Sophie was alone because half her heart was with me. The children nodded solemnly, finding comfort in this explanation of their own fractured and reconnected lives. As evening approached, the families gathered on the beach for a bonfire. Robert watched his children move among the group, offering reassurance to younger twins, sharing experiences with parents struggling to understand their children's unique needs, belonging completely to this unusual community created through shared trauma and healing. Dr. Richards joined him at the edge of the gathering, her clinical reserve softened by a year of working closely with the children. The latest scans show continued integration of neural pathways in all the twin pairs. The younger they were when reunited, the more complete the integration. And Lucas and Sophie? Still exceptional. Their separation lasted longer than any of the others, yet their neural resonance remains the strongest. Their brains adapted not just to survive the separation, but to actively maintain connection across distance. She shook her head in lingering amazement. Victoria was right about one thing. They are extraordinary, just not in the way she intended to use them. As darkness fell, the twins organized the other children for storytelling around the fire. Lucas began a tale about lost siblings finding each other through dreams and whispers and feelings that couldn't be explained. Sophie continued when he paused, their narrative flowing seamlessly between them, holding the younger children spellbound. Robert watched his son and daughter, both his children, their faces illuminated by firelight, their voices rising and falling in perfect harmony as they wove a story of separation and reunion, of broken pieces made whole again. The story was their own, transformed into hope for the other children who had survived similar journeys. In that moment, Robert understood that his children would never be ordinary. The neural resonance that connected them, that had developed as protection against Victoria's cruel experiment, had given them extraordinary gifts along with their trauma. They would always be different, always connected in ways science was just beginning to understand. But they would also be whole, be loved, be secure in their family and their future. The silence that had imprisoned Lucas had been broken not by medical intervention, but by the return of his twin, his other half. The isolation that had forced Sophie to survive through cunning and caution had been ended by reunion with her brother and father. The twins had found their voice, not just in speech, but in purpose. Their shared experience, their unique connection, had become a beacon for others walking similar paths. What Victoria Andrews had intended as exploitation had transformed into healing. What she had designed to divide had instead created unbreakable bonds. As the stars emerged above the Pacific Ocean, Robert Westbrook watched his children continue their story. Twin voices rising as one against the darkness, echoes of silence, transformed into harmony, broken pieces made whole again.